Bruce Lee was not just a martial artist, he was not just an actor, and he was definitely not just a fighter. Bruce Lee was a thinker, a philosopher, a man decades ahead of his time. In just 32 years of life, he completely changed how the world understands martial arts, movement, discipline, and self-expression. He shattered boundaries that seemed permanent. He questioned truths that seemed absolute. And he built something revolutionary from the wisdom of the past and the possibilities of the future. This is not a story about fights. This is not a highlight reel of spectacular kicks and devastating punches. This is the story of a mind that refused limits, a spirit that could not be contained, a journey from fear to freedom that would inspire millions around the world for generations to come. Childhood in Araya GNS Bruce Lee was born on November 27, 1940, San Francisco, California. In the Hour of the Dragon, during the Year of the Dragon, in Chinese astrology, this was considered an extremely powerful sign, representing strength, wisdom, and transformation. But destiny, as Bruce would learn, is never a straight path. Though born in America, Bruce spent most of his childhood in Hong Kong, in the crowded, chaotic streets of Kowloon. His family lived modestly despite his father's fame. Li Hoi Chuan was a well-known Cantonese opera star who traveled constantly for performances, leaving young Bruce to navigate the rough streets largely on his own. His mother, Grace Ho, came from one of Hong Kong's wealthiest and most prominent families, but had been partially disowned for marrying an actor, a profession considered lowly at the time. From a very young age, Bruce's life was turbulent and uncertain. Hong Kong, in the 1940s and 50s, was a city recovering from war, filled with poverty, gang violence, and social unrest. The streets were dangerous, especially for a boy like Bruce. He was small for his age, physically weak and shy. He became a target for neighborhood bullies almost immediately. He was chased home from school regularly. He was beaten up in alleyways. He learned to fear the sound of footsteps behind him. Street fights became part of his daily reality, not out of pride, not out of anger, but pure survival. He didn't want to fight. He had to fight. And more often than not, he lost. Ironically, Bruce Lee did not begin martial arts to dominate others or to become some legendary warrior. He began because he was afraid, because he was tired of running, because he wanted to feel safe walking home from school. His father saw the fear and frustration building in his son and knew something had to change. So at the age of 13, Bruce was introduced to Wing Chun, a practical and efficient Chinese martial art designed for close-range combat and self-defense. His teacher was none other than IP Man, the legendary grandmaster who would become one of the most famous martial arts instructors in history. IP Man was strict, traditional, and deeply philosophical. He didn't just teach techniques, he taught principles. Timing over strength, positioning over power, sensitivity to your opponent's energy rather than just blindly attacking. For the first time in his young life, Bruce discovered discipline instead of chaos, structure instead of panic, purpose instead of aimless fear. He trained obsessively, spending hours at the Wing Chun school, practicing on the wooden dummy until his knuckles bled, drilling the same movements over and over until they became instinctive. Slowly, the weak, frightened boy began to transform. He grew confident. His body became stronger. His reflexes sharpened. His fear turned into focus. But even then, even as he absorbed the teachings of Wing Chun, Bruce questioned everything. He didn't just learn the techniques, he interrogated them. He tested them. He wanted to understand not just how to do a movement, but why it worked. What made it effective? Could it be improved? Were there better ways? This curiosity, this refusal to simply accept what he was told, would define the rest of his life. He was already becoming someone who wouldn't just follow a path, he would create his own. Asterisk. The problem with traditional traditional martial arts in the 1950s and 60s were built on a foundation of obedience and preservation. Students learned fixed form sequences of movements called kata, or forms that had been passed down through generations, sometimes for centuries. These forms were considered sacred, unchangeable treasures of ancient wisdom. You were expected to repeat them exactly as your master taught you, and your master learned them from his master. In an unbroken chain stretching back through time, there was a beauty to this preservation of tradition, but there was also a rigidity. No questions were allowed. No improvisation was permitted. No creativity was tolerated. You simply obeyed, repeated, and hoped that through thousands of repetitions, understanding would eventually come. Bruce Lee hated that approach with every fiber of his being. He believed that styles were prisons, mental cages that trapped practitioners in outdated patterns. He saw students who could perform absolutely beautiful forms and demonstrations, movements so precise and graceful they looked like dances, but who froze completely in actual fights. They had memorized choreography, but they hadn't learned to think, to adapt, to respond to an unpredictable opponent. They were like actors who had memorized their lines perfectly but couldn't improvise if something unexpected happened on stage. Bruce believed this was a fundamental betrayal of what martial arts should be. Martial arts, he thought, should be about truth, about what actually works in real combat. Not about preserving museum pieces of ancient movements that might have been useful hundreds of years ago, but were inefficient now. He once said something that would become one of his most famous quotes: "Man, the living creature, the creating individual, is always more important than any established style or system." This single sentence contained a revolutionary idea. It meant that you, as an individual human being, with your own body, your own strengths, your own way of moving, were more important than any rigid system someone else had created. It meant you should adapt martial arts to fit you, not twist yourself to fit martial arts. It meant creativity and individual expression were not just allowed, they were essential. This belief would later make him an outsider, even an enemy, within the traditional martial arts world. In Chinese martial arts culture, questioning your master was considered deeply disrespectful, almost unforgivable. Challenging established techniques was seen as arrogance. And blending different martial arts styles together, that was considered absolute heresy. A pollution of pure lineages that had been carefully preserved for generations. But Bruce Lee didn't care about tradition for tradition's sake. He cared about effectiveness. He cared about truth. He started watching other martial artists and other combat sports with fresh eyes. He watched Western boxers and noticed their footwork was far faster and more mobile than traditional Wing Chun stances. He studied fencing and admired the directness and economy of their attacks, no wasted movement. Just straight lines to the target. He observed wrestlers and saw the crucial importance of positioning, leverage, and controlling your opponent's base. Every style, he realized, had discovered something valuable. And every style had limitations and weaknesses. So why would you limit yourself to just one style? Why would you tie one hand behind your back by refusing to learn from other approaches? This question would haunt Bruce and eventually transform not just his martial arts, but martial arts itself. America and the Cultural CLSHN, 1959. At the age of 18, Bruce Lee made a decision that would change his life completely. He left Hong Kong and moved to the United States. He came with almost nothing, a small amount of money, some clothes, and an enormous hunger to grow, to learn, to become something greater than the street fighter he had been. He enrolled at the University of Washington in Seattle, studying philosophy of all things. While his classmates debated Plato and Aristotle and Kant in lecture halls, Bruce was teaching martial arts in parking lots and church basements and anywhere else he could find space, earning just enough money to pay his tuition and rent a small apartment. But America in the 1960s was not kind to Asian immigrants. Racism was open, legal, and casually accepted in most of society. Bruce experienced it everywhere he turned. Hollywood didn't want an Asian leading man under any circumstances. They wanted him as a sidekick, a houseboy, a villain, an exotic curiosity, but never as the hero, never as someone audiences were supposed to identify with and root for. Casting directors would take one look at him and say things like, "You're very talented." But American audiences just aren't ready for an Oriental leading man. The word Oriental itself was used casually, as if Asian people were objects to be categorized rather than human beings. Martial arts schools in America's Chinatowns didn't want innovation either. Many traditional Chinese martial arts masters who had immigrated to America guarded their techniques jealously. There were unwritten but firmly enforced rules. Chinese martial arts were only for Chinese people. Teaching white students was seen as a betrayal. It's giving away sacred secrets to outsiders who hadn't earned them and couldn't possibly understand them. Bruce Lee broke that rule deliberately and defiantly. He kept teaching anyway, to anyone who wanted to learn. He opened schools in Seattle, then Oakland, then Los Angeles. He trained anyone willing to put in the work: boxers, karate practitioners, judo fighters, wrestlers, students from all backgrounds and ethnicities. He didn't care about your race or your lineage. He only cared about your dedication and your willingness to question and grow. He blended disciplines freely, teaching Wing Chun techniques alongside Western boxing footwork, alongside fencing principles. He was creating something that had never existed before: truly hybrid martial art, that took the best elements from every style and discarded the rest. This was absolutely revolutionary. It was also threatening to traditional martial artists who saw him as destroying the purity of their ancient systems. In 1964, this tension exploded. Bruce Lee was formally challenged to a private fight in Oakland by a group of traditional Chinese martial artists representing the local Chinese Martial Arts Association. They were furious that he was teaching non-Chinese students and that he was, in their view, corrupting and diluting traditional kung fu. The terms of the challenge were stark and unforgiving. If Bruce lost, he had to stop teaching non-Chinese students and close his schools permanently. If he won, he could continue teaching whoever he wanted. Bruce accepted immediately. The fight lasted only 3 minutes. Bruce won decisively, forcing his opponent to submit. But the victory bothered him deeply. It had taken longer than he expected. He had gotten winded. His techniques, while effective, weren't as efficient as they should have been. He realized something profound in that moment. Even he was still limited by his Wing Chun training. Even he was still trapped by the boundaries of a single style. He had one, yes, but not perfectly. And Bruce Lee demanded perfection, especially from himself. This realization became the seed that would grow into something entirely new. Something that would change martial arts forever. Jeet Kune Do. The Phi Bruce Lee did not create a new martial arts style in the traditional sense. He didn't invent a new set of forms or a new curriculum or a new belt system. Instead, he created something far more radical: a way of thinking. A philosophy of constant adaptation and personal expression. He called it Jeet Kune Do, which translates from Cantonese as the way of the intercepting fist. But that name is almost misleading because Jeet Kune Do wasn't really about intercepting punches. It was about intercepting your own limitations. It was about breaking free from any system that tried to contain you. The core philosophy of Jeet Kune Do can be summarized in 3 deceptively simple principles. First, absorb what is useful. Study everything. Learn from every style, every teacher, every source of knowledge you can find. If a technique works, if it's efficient and effective, take it and make it yours. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Truth is truth, regardless of its origin. Second, reject what is useless. Don't keep techniques just because they're traditional or because they look impressive. If something doesn't work in actual combat, if it's inefficient or impractical, discard it without hesitation or guilt. Be ruthless in your evaluation. And third, add what is uniquely your own. You are not a clone of your teacher. You have a different body, different strengths, different ways of moving and thinking. Adapt techniques to fit your individual characteristics. Express yourself through your martial arts. Make it personal. This philosophy wasn't just about fighting. It was about life itself. It was about learning, about growth, about becoming the fullest expression of yourself in everything you do. Bruce Lee believed the human body and mind should move naturally, without artificial restrictions or rigid categories. He became famous for his metaphor about water. He said you should be like water because water has no fixed shape. When you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. When you put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you put it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water doesn't fight against the container, it adapts to it perfectly. And water can flow gently, or it can crash with devastating power. It can be soft or hard depending on what the situation requires. Be water, my friend, Bruce would say. This wasn't mystical nonsense or Eastern philosophy for its own sake. This was a practical principle about adaptability and natural movement. But Bruce went far beyond philosophy and metaphors. He became obsessed with understanding movement scientifically. He studied Western boxing extensively and incorporated its speed, its direct punches, its mobile footwork. He studied fencing and adopted its linear attacking philosophy and its distance management. He studied wrestling for understanding, position, and leverage. He read books on biomechanics, on physics, on anatomy, and physiology. He wanted to understand exactly why techniques worked at a mechanical level, which muscles were involved. which angles were most efficient, how force transferred through the body. He kept detailed training journals, thousands of pages filled with notes, sketches, observations, and experiments. He filmed himself training and watched the footage in slow motion, analyzing every movement, looking for inefficiencies, searching for ways to improve. This wasn't mysticism. This was the scientific method applied to martial arts. The traditional martial arts world despised him for all of this. They called him a rebel, a traitor, a sellout who had abandoned his roots. They said he was disrespecting the ancient masters and destroying the cultural heritage of martial arts. They said mixing styles was like mixing oil and water. It would only create confusion and mediocrity. But Bruce didn't care about their approval or their criticism. He wasn't trying to win a popularity contest among traditional masters. He was searching for something bigger than tradition, something more important than preserving the past. He was searching for truth about human movement and human potential. And in that search, he became something unprecedented. Not just a great martial artist, but a true pioneer who would influence not just martial arts, but athletics, fitness, personal development, and even philosophy itself. Returned to Hong Kong, and if rejected and frustrated in America. Bruce Lee made another life-changing decision in 1971. He returned to Hong Kong. It's not in defeat, but in defiance. And there, everything changed almost overnight. His first film, The Big Boss, was released and immediately shattered every box office record in Hong Kong cinema history. Audiences had never seen anything like it before. Here was someone who could actually fight, performing martial arts that looked real and powerful and fast, not the staged, obviously fake choreography they were used to. And Bruce had a charisma that exploded off the screen. He moved with a confidence and intensity that was magnetic. People couldn't look away. Then came Fist of Fury, and this wasn't just an action film anymore. This was a statement, a cultural moment. In one of the most famous scenes in cinema history, Bruce's character destroys a sign that reads "No dogs in Chinese allowed," a sign that had actually existed in colonial Shanghai. A symbol of the humiliation and racism that Chinese people had endured under foreign occupation. When Bruce kicked that sign to pieces on screen, when he fought back against the Japanese and Western oppressors in the story, Asian audiences around the world saw themselves represented in a way they never had been before. Not as jokes, not as sidekicks, or servants, or villains, but as heroes. As powerful, as deserving of respect and dignity. Bruce Lee became more than a movie star in that moment. He became a symbol of pride and empowerment for Asian people everywhere. Then came Way of the Dragon, which Bruce wrote, directed, and starred in, giving him complete creative control. The film featured his legendary fight scene with Chuck Norris in the Roman Colosseum, sequence that is still studied by filmmakers and martial artists today for its choreography and cinematography. But even in the midst of this explosive fame and success, Bruce remained obsessed with improvement rather than basking in his celebrity. He rewrote scripts constantly to make fight scenes more realistic and more meaningful. He demanded that his co-stars actually train and learn proper technique instead of just faking it. He refused to play stereotypes or buffoons or any of the racist caricatures that Hollywood and Asian cinema had traditionally offered to Asian actors. He had creative control now. He used it to change how Asian people were portrayed on screen. And then came the pinnacle, Enter the Dragon. This was the first major co-production between Hollywood and Hong Kong cinema. A Bruce Lee film with a real budget, with international distribution. With Bruce Lee finally, undeniably, unquestionably as the star. The opening scene alone, where Bruce fights in a tournament and then has a philosophical conversation with his Shaolin teacher about the nature of thought and emotion, showed that this was going to be something different. This wasn't just going to be another action movie. This was going to be art. This was going to be philosophy expressed through movement. Enter the Dragon was finished in early 1973, and it was set to make Bruce Lee the first Asian global superstar. The first to truly break through Hollywood's racial barriers completely. But Bruce Lee would never see its release. He would never know that his dream had finally come true. Death in LEGACY, July 20th, 1973. Bruce Lee collapsed at the Hong Kong apartment of actress Betty Tingpei, where he had been discussing a film project. He complained of a headache, took a painkiller, and lay down to rest. He never woke up. He was rushed to Queen Elizabeth Hospital but was pronounced dead on arrival. Bruce Lee, the man who seemed superhuman, who moved faster than the eye could follow, who had inspired millions, was gone at the age of 32. The world was stunned, shocked into disbelief. This couldn't be real. Someone like Bruce Lee couldn't just die. but he had. Conspiracy theories erupted immediately and have continued for decades. Was he murdered by jealous martial artists protecting their traditional styles? Was it a triad gangster hit because he refused to cooperate with organized crime? Was it the ancient curse of his family? Was it foul play by Hollywood studios or rival actors? The speculation was endless, fueled by the seeming impossibility that someone so alive, so vital, could simply be gone. But the official cause of death was far less dramatic and far more tragic. A cerebral edema swelling of the brain caused by a hypersensitive reaction to a painkiller he had taken for a headache. His body pushed to its absolute limits for years through intense training and grueling film schedules had finally given out. The autopsy found he had almost no body fat, that his body was operating on such a razor's edge that even a minor medical event could be catastrophic. Bruce Lee had quite literally worked himself to death in pursuit of perfection. Enter the Dragon was released. Just 6 days after his death, it became the highest-grossing film of 1973 worldwide. It made Bruce Lee an international legend, a household name across the globe. But he never knew. He never got to see the triumph he had worked his entire life to achieve. The funeral in Hong Kong drew thousands of mourners. The streets were packed with grieving fans. When his body was flown to Seattle for burial, even more people came to pay their respects. The grief was real and profound because Bruce Lee had meant something to people. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was a symbol of possibility, of breaking through limitations, refusing to accept the boxes society tried to put you in. But while Bruce Lee the man died in 1973, his ideas did not die. In fact, they were just beginning to spread. Today, mixed martial arts exists almost exactly as Bruce Lee envisioned it. Fighters train in boxing, wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and whatever else works, absorbing what is useful, rejecting what is useless, adding what is uniquely their own. Modern functional fitness and cross-training, the idea that you should develop your body in multiple ways rather than specializing narrowly, comes directly from Bruce's approach. Evidence-based coaching, the idea that you should test and measure and experiment rather than just following tradition, is pure Bruce Lee philosophy. His influence extends far beyond martial arts into athletics, personal development, business innovation, and even philosophy departments at universities where his writings are now studied. Seriously, Bruce Lee taught us something that transcends martial arts completely. He taught us that the greatest fight is not against another person. It's against limitation itself, against fear, against the voice inside that says you can't change, you can't grow, you can't become more than you are, against systems and traditions and authorities that try to put you in a box and keep you there. His legacy is not violence or fighting. His legacy is freedom, the freedom to question, to experiment, to adapt, to express yourself fully without apology or permission. Closing. The eternal Messiah, Bruce Lee, did not want followers who would blindly imitate his every move and treat his words as sacred scripture. He wanted thinkers who would question everything, including him. He wanted people who would forge their own paths rather than just walking down paths others had already made. He wanted individuals who would discover their own truths rather than just accepting what they were told, who would refuse to be limited by style, by tradition, by fear, by the expectations of others, or by their own past failures. Absorb what is useful. Reject what is useless. Add what is uniquely your own. These three principles contain an entire philosophy of life. They tell you to be a student of everything, learning from every source and every experience. They tell you to be discriminating and honest, letting go of what doesn't serve you, even if it's popular or traditional. And they tell you to be yourself, to express your own unique nature, rather than trying to be a copy of someone else. And decades after his death, Bruce Lee's message remains unchanged and uncorrupted. His philosophy is still revolutionary. His spirit still inspires. In a world that constantly tries to categorize people, to put them in boxes, to tell them who they should be and what they should do, Bruce Lee's voice still calls out across the years with a simple, powerful invitation. Be water, my friend. Flow around obstacles. Adapt to changing circumstances. Be soft when softness is needed, and powerful when power is required. Move naturally. Think for yourself. Question everything. And above all, refuse to be limited by anything except the boundaries of your own imagination and effort. That is the legacy of Bruce Lee. That is the gift he left to all of us. Not a fighting style, not a set of techniques, but a way of thinking and living that can transform anyone willing to embrace it. Be water.